You'd risk your company. For me. Claire's voice trembled as she stared at Ethan across the conference room, surrounded by blueprints, contracts, and a silence thick with meaning. He didn't hesitate. For the right person, always in that single moment, everything changed. What began as a spilled coffee and a tense job interview had become something far more delicate and infinitely more powerful. Between sleepless nights on architectural deadlines, heartbreaks buried beneath years of silence, and unexpected sparks that refused to be ignored, their story wasn't just about design, it was about rebuilding two broken hearts, one blueprint at a time. This is a love story, born from second chances built on courage and held together by the kind of trust that even 20 years of grief couldn't destroy. So if you're ready to follow the journey of Ethan and Clare, a journey from cold offices to warm homes, from guarded glances to lifelong promises, then you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, so you never miss a moment that might just move your heart. Now, let's begin. Would you like me to write a Vietnamese version of this intro as well? A soft haze blanketed the skyline of Ash Grove, where golden light filtered through rows of trees lining the avenue, in front of a sleek glass tower, Hollingsworth & Co. The city buzzed gently, yet in that moment it felt like time held its breath. Clare Whitmore stood still at the foot of the building, fingers tightening around an old leather folder. Fresh out of grad school, she carried her hopes in one hand and a silent storm of ambition in the other. This wasn't just any interview, it was her last thread of stability. At the top of that tower, Graham Hollingsworth, founder and creative director of one of the East Coast's most respected architectural firms, leaned back in his leather chair, gaze sharp and unforgiving. "I don't need someone new on the Westridge contract, Alan. Especially not some designer who couldn't cut it at Baxter & Field," he said coolly to his longtime partner. Alan Carter didn't flinch, Clare Whitmore didn't fail. She walked away when Garrett Baxter started slapping his name on her ideas. "And you do need someone? Graham Westridge is our biggest urban project in 5 years." Graham turned to the floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline of Ash Grove laid out like one of his early drafts, clean-controlled, unfeeling. At 51, he was the master of precision. Professionally, he had built empires. Personally, he lived in silence, the kind that echoes at night. "She starts tomorrow." "You're conducting the interview," Alan said before walking out, left alone. Graham loosened his tie and opened a drawer with mechanical ease. Inside was a velvet box untouched for years. He didn't need to look inside to see the emerald-cut ring that had once sparkled on Isabel's hand for exactly 3 months, and 19 days before fate stole her away. That night, his penthouse stayed mostly dark, except for the soft clink of ice against glass. On his table, a portfolio lay open, Clare Whitmore. Her resume was flawless, her work exceptional. But it wasn't her experience that unsettled him, it was her photo. There was defiance in her eyes. A quiet promise that she wouldn't play by unspoken rules. His phone buzzed a message from his younger sister, Juliet. "Have you seen her work yet? She could be exactly what this firm and maybe you need. Give her a chance. Don't shut the door before she even knocks." But Graham had built a life where doors stayed shut. The next morning, as the elevator climbed, Clare adjusted her blazer. She had memorized every project in the Hollingsworth portfolio. She knew the floor plan of the building better than some of its interns, but none of it prepared her for what happened next. The elevator doors opened. She stepped out and nearly collided with a tall, sharply dressed man. "Excuse me," she said, balancing a tray of coffee cups. "You're supposed to use the service entrance," the man replied coolly, eyeing her visitor badge. "I'm not delivering coffee," Clare said evenly. "Just bringing it to the team I'm joining today." "Clare Whitmore." She offered her hand. A flicker of recognition passed over his face. "Graham. Hollingsworth. My office." 10 minutes. He walked away without waiting. Clare exhaled slowly, so that was him. Inside his office. Graham laid her portfolio on the table with exacting symmetry. He wasn't going to make this easy, but Clare wasn't here for easy. 10 minutes later, she stepped inside, composed and calm. No coat, navy suit tailored to perfection, eyes steady. She was ready. Miss Whitmore, Graham said, without offering a seat, "Your portfolio is strong, but I need to know why you walked away from Baxter and Field." Clare didn't blink because the line between mentorship and theft blurred too many times, and I stopped being willing to have my work stolen with a smile. He watched her, no flinching, no drama, just truth that he could respect. "And why here?" he asked. "Because you build legacies," Clare answered. "And I'm done designing for people who want credit more than impact." Before he could reply, his assistant burst in. "Mr. Hollingsworth, the Langston clients are early." Graham glanced at his watch. They weren't due for another hour. They landed ahead of schedule. They're already in the conference room. He turned back to Clare. "We'll finish this later. Find your way to HR." As she left, Graham caught himself watching her. And for the first time in years, something in him shifted slightly, but undeniably. She was a storm he hadn't planned for, and storms he knew from experience always changed the landscape. As Graham stepped into the hallway, he nearly collided with a woman carrying a cardboard tray of coffee cups. "Sorry," she said. Taking a step back with surprising balance, "Didn't see you coming." He glanced at her visitor badge and replied coolly, "Deliveries go through the service entrance." A flicker of something flashed in her eyes, mild irritation, maybe even defiance. "I'm not a courier," she said, shifting the tray into one arm and extending her hand. "Clare Whitmore, I start today." His gaze narrowed slightly, a misstep on his part, and he knew it. Still, his face remained unreadable. "Graham, Hollingsworth, my office." 15 minutes. Back in his office, Graham arranged Clare's portfolio across his desk with near-clinical precision. She had strong recommendations, an impeccable portfolio, and Alan's full endorsement, but that didn't mean she would get a free pass. When Clare entered exactly 15 minutes later, her coat was gone, revealing a tailored suit and a posture that spoke of quiet readiness. She carried herself like someone who had nothing left to prove, and that annoyed him more than he expected. "Miss Whitmore," he began, not motioning to the chair. "Your resume shows ability, but I'd like to know why you walked away from Baxter and Field so suddenly." "It wasn't sudden from where I stood," she said calmly. "Garrett Baxter passed off my concept for the Valencia Library project as his own. When I raised the issue, I was sidelined. So I walked." Graham studied her carefully. There was no anger in her voice, no attempt to paint herself as a victim, only clarity. "And why here?" "Because you design structures that outlive the moment," she replied. "I want to be part of something that matters long after the lights are off." Before he could reply, his assistant stepped into the room, clearly rattled. "Mr. Hollingsworth, the Langley clients have arrived. They were early. They weren't due for another hour." Graham muttered, glancing at the clock. "Their flight was rescheduled. They leave again before noon." He turned back to Clare. "We'll pick this up later. HR is expecting you." As she nodded and turned to leave, Graham felt a strange hesitation, an impulse to continue their conversation. He dismissed it as quickly as it came. There was too much to do. Clare's first official day at Hollingsworth & Co. began with rain tapping steadily on the windows of the 30th floor. She set up her desk with quiet precision. Laptop centered a small plant on the corner, and a single framed photo of her younger brother tucked discreetly beside the monitor. "First day nerves?" a warm voice asked. Clare looked up to see a man her age, easy smile, kind eyes. "Logan Carter," he said, offering his hand. "We emailed a bit. I reviewed your portfolio before Alan made the final call." "Of course," Clare replied. "Thanks for pushing it forward." He leaned against her desk, slightly lowering his voice. "Graham's intense, but he's sharp fare too. Most days." "I got a taste of the intensity yesterday." she said, with a half smile. Still waiting on the rest. Logan chuckled. Big presentation today, the Langley group. Graham wants you in the room to observe. Claire nodded, masking the nerves that twisted just under her skin. Once alone again, she pulled open her top drawer and slipped in a folder, the final divorce papers signed and sealed just 3 months ago. New job, new skyline, new start. She remembered the night she had found the messages on Evan's phone, late-night exchanges with someone she thought was just a colleague. She remembered the betrayal, not just of love, but of trust and of ambition. She had left both the man and the city behind. Now it was time to rebuild. Claire had walked away from both her marriage and Baxter and Field in the same month. One life closed. Another, still uncertain, had only just begun. The conference room on the 31st floor buzzed with low voices and clinking glass as Claire stepped in. At the head of the table, Graham stood adjusting the layout of printed presentation boards with meticulous care, each corner perfectly aligned, every margin intentional. Miss Whitmore, distribute these visual drafts, please, he said. Not bothering to glance up, she took the crisp stack of renderings from the table, beautifully composed views of the Langley complex redesign. As she began moving around the table, the door suddenly swung open, bumping her arm. Her coffee jolted, tipping forward in her grasp. A soft gasp escaped her lips as hot liquid splashed across 3 of the prints. The dark stains spread like a slow bruise. The room froze. I'm so sorry, Claire said, horrified. Her heart pounded. Graham's face didn't move at first, but his jaw set in sharp silence. The Langleys will be here in 5 minutes, he said. Voice clipped. Claire's mind spun. Then it landed. The digital files, she said quickly. We can adapt. Go immersive. Before he could stop her, she crossed to the workstation in the corner of the room. Logan, can you access the 3D models? Let's shift the pitch, real-time walkthrough instead of static boards. He nodded. Already. Moving, Graham remained still, arms folded, eyes narrowed, but he didn't interfere. When the Langley couple entered, distinguished and graceful, Claire didn't hesitate. Mr. and Mrs. Langley, we're so glad you're here. She began, her voice warm but steady. Today, instead of showing you flat images, we'd love to take you inside your future space. And for the next 20 minutes, she guided them through a fully immersive tour of their future offices. She highlighted materials sourced from sustainable partners, discussed how each space was designed to foster collaboration, and wove in personal touches based on details she'd read in their company bio the night before, Mrs. Langley smiled often. Mr. Langley asked a dozen questions, and Claire had answers for all of them. When the presentation ended, there was a pause, and then Mr. Langley turned to Graham. This is exactly what we needed. Your team didn't just hear us, they understood us. When they left full of praise and promises. Claire waited, braced for critique. Graham looked at her, his expression unreadable, then he nodded once. Smart adjustment, he said. Next time, no drinks near the deliverables. Yes, sir, Claire replied, relieved, though she'd hoped just a little for more. That afternoon, Logan stopped by her desk. They signed the preliminary agreement, he said, grinning. Graham was impressed. Really? Claire raised an eyebrow. Did he actually say that? Well, he said, smart adjustment. Logan laughed, which in Hollingsworth speak is like a standing ovation. He leaned in slightly. You should come to the firm social tonight. We clean up well when we're not hunched over blueprints. The lounge overlooked Ashgrove Bay, glowing under the city lights. Claire arrived in a classic black dress, simple, elegant enough to feel like herself. From across the room, she spotted Graham immediately, alone near the windows, a scotch in hand, eyes scanning the room like he was measuring the emotional architecture of the crowd. He always does. That, came a voice beside her. Claire turned to see a woman with effortless grace and the same sharp blue eyes. Watches people like, They're part of some design he's calculating. Sophia Hollingsworth, she said, extending her hand. The less rigid sibling, Clare Whitmore. She replied, smiling. Apparently the coffee spiller who accidentally saved your brother's pitch. Sophia grinned. Word travels. Robert mentioned you. All bad, I assume. Actually, no, Sophia said, which from Graham is basically a standing ovation. Clare glanced again toward him. He seems distant. Sophia sighed. He's always been that way, but this time of year, it's worse. The anniversary is close, Sophia said quietly. Anniversary? Clare asked. Of Olivia's passing. She was Graham's fiancée. They were engaged when she died in a car crash. That was nearly 20 years ago, but to him, it might as well have been last week. Clare felt something inside her shift. Graham Hollingsworth. The man she had pegged as cool and controlled was suddenly more than a stoic figure behind a glass wall. He was someone frozen in a chapter that time had never fully closed. No one serious, since she asked gently. Sophia shook her head. Not even close. He built this firm from the ground up, filled his life with precision and projects, but he never really came back to the world across the room, as if sensing her gaze. Graham looked up. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something wordless passed between them. Not vulnerability, not exactly recognition, maybe of loss, of the courage it takes to keep walking through it. Clare lifted her glass slightly, a quiet salute, and after a heartbeat, Graham returned the gesture. The next morning, Graham slid a thick project folder across his desk toward Clare. The Ashgrove Wharf project needs someone who can manage both the technical planning and the client interface, he said without preamble. I'm assigning it to you. Clare blinked. That's your highest profile active build. Yes, he said simply. Is that a problem? Not at all, she replied, flipping open the folder. Just surprised you'd trust it to someone this new. The Langleys requested you directly, he said, and something in his tone suggested he wasn't entirely pleased about it, and your experience supports the assignment. Clare felt a quiet surge of something she hadn't felt in a long time, validation, real earned and hers alone. Thank you, she said. I won't let you down. I know you won't. Graham replied. It wasn't flattery, it was a fact. Over the following weeks, Clare buried herself in the Ashgrove Wharf development, a sweeping waterfront project that blended commercial, residential, and green public space. She quickly learned that while Graham's architectural vision was extraordinary, his people skills left room for improvement. Mr. Callahan, I understand your concerns about the atrium configuration. Graham said during a tense client meeting. His tone was firm, bordering on icy, but modifying the design would compromise the structural integrity of the eastern tower. The client's jaw tightened. Then find a solution that doesn't compromise either. I'm not paying for excuses. A heavy silence fell. Clare cleared her throat. What if we adjusted the support grid just slightly? She said, pulling out her tablet. We could maintain the load-bearing columns, but integrate them as sculptural features that complement your company's branding. Like this. She turned the screen toward him, showing an elegant sketch of organic flowing forms that echoed his logo's motif. Mr. Callahan leaned forward. That's interesting. By the end of the meeting, tension had faded, replaced by measured optimism. Later in the elevator, Graham said nothing. Clare broke the silence. I wasn't trying to step on your toes back there. He looked straight ahead. I work in structural logic. Clare, not emotional calculus. She smiled softly. Sometimes the most stable structures need a little flexibility, especially when people are the ones using them. His only response was a slight twitch of his jaw, but she caught it. It wasn't dismissal. It was thought, Clare, structure is important. Graham said, his tone calm but resistant, and so are the people who live and work within it. Clare replied, ignoring the human element, doesn't strengthen your design. It limits it. Graham looked at her brows raised. He wasn't used to being challenged so directly. After a brief pause, he nodded. You might be right, he admitted. Client meetings have never exactly been my favorite part of the job. Claire tilted her head, offering a gentle suggestion. What if we shifted the process? You lead the vision. Your designs are incredible. I'll handle the client interface, the communication side. There was a moment of silence, then he nodded slowly. Let's try it. The change worked. Graham's architectural concepts remained bold and meticulous, and Claire became the translator between his vision and the client's expectations. The Ashgrove Wharf project began to flow more smoothly, each meeting more productive than the last. They settled into a quiet rhythm, one built on trust and mutual respect. Then came a Tuesday when Graham didn't show up. He never takes days off. Thomas remarked concern flickering in his expression when Claire asked, "But today's different." Claire's breath caught Sophia's words from the company gathering echoed back, "The anniversary is coming up." That night, after staring at her phone and battling indecision, Claire found herself driving toward Graham's building. She'd only seen the address once on internal documents. For 15 long minutes, she sat in her car, questioning everything. Then she stepped out and approached the doorman. "I'm here to see Mr. Hollingsworth," she said, holding out her ID. "It's work-related, urgent." He let her through without question. When the door opened, it wasn't the man she knew from the office who stood before her. Graham's hair was tousled, his shirt untucked, and his eyes empty. He held a glass of dark whiskey, the scent heavy in the air. "Miss Whitmore," he said flatly. "This isn't appropriate, and neither is drowning alone in scotch on a Tuesday," Claire said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. The apartment was sterile, sleek, like a catalog spread. Not a single object out of place, except the emotionless hush that lingered in the corners. It didn't feel lived in. It felt preserved. Her gaze landed on the only thing that hinted at a life before this, a framed photo on the mantel. A younger Graham stood beside a woman with rich, dark hair and an unforgettable smile. Both were laughing, caught in a moment of joy. "Olivia," she asked gently. Graham tensed. "So Sophia told you?" "She mentioned it," Claire said quietly. She walked to the kitchen, found a clean glass, filled it with water, and returned. She handed it to him. "Try this instead." To her surprise, he took it, set the scotch down without protest. "Why are you really here?" he asked. Voice softer now. Claire didn't hesitate. "Because loss carves deep, and anniversaries, they don't pass, they press." She told him about her own fracture, about finding messages on her ex-husband's phone, about the quiet betrayal and the hollow ache that followed, the little things, songs, cafes inside jokes, that still ambushed her when she least expected it. "Your grief. It's heavier. I won't pretend to understand it fully," she said, "but I've carried my own weight." Graham stared ahead for a long time before speaking. "We were supposed to get married at the Arboretum," he said finally. "It was her favorite place." "Have you been back?" Claire asked. "Not once. Not in 20 years. They sat in silence after that, a quiet that didn't ask for solutions, only presence. "Thank you," Graham said, eventually, "for not pretending to fix it." Claire smiled faintly. "Platitudes are for people who've never been shattered. They don't work on those of us who've had to rebuild." When she left, the air between them had changed, not into something defined, but into something real. A thread of understanding had woven itself between two people who knew how loss lingers long after the world expects you to be over it. The next morning, Graham walked into the office exactly on time. Pressed suit, steady hands, focused eyes. But Claire noticed something different. A quiet softness just beneath the surface, like the very beginning of spring after a long winter. As Graham passed Claire's desk that morning, he paused just for a moment. 2 o'clock. That meeting with Dovetail Investments, he said, not quite looking at her. I think your method might work better this time. It wasn't warmth exactly, but for Graham Hollingsworth, it was as close to connection as he had ever allowed himself in an office setting. Clare caught the shift, subtle but sincere, and nodded. For now, that was enough. Later that night, well past normal working hours, the soft hum of the city drifted in through the 32nd floor windows. The office was deserted, save for two figures leaning over a detailed model of the Harbor Light residences. The sightlines from the northwest facade still bother me, Graham murmured, eyes narrowed in concentration. Clare leaned over the model, fingertips brushing the plexiglass. What if we adjust the angle of the curtain wall here? She asked, sweeping a strand of hair behind her ear. Absent-mindedly, Graham studied her idea, then slowly shifted one of the model's pieces. Yes, he said quietly. That's exactly it. Over the last 2 months, since that night she'd shown up at his apartment, something had shifted between them. During business hours, their roles remained crisp and professional, but these late evenings full of half-finished coffees and architectural puzzles had become something else, an unspoken collaboration that lived in the silences between words and the synergy of ideas. You have sharp instincts, Graham said, still focused on the model. Sharper than most I've worked with. Clare gave a half smile. Coming from you, I think that qualifies as a compliment. Don't get used to it, he replied. But the sarcasm was laced with warmth that hadn't been there when they first met. Their project had evolved into more than a blueprint, it had become a vision shaped by both of them. Clare had introduced public workshops that earned the trust of skeptical stakeholders. Graham had allowed his once rigid concepts to breathe, to bend toward real human need without sacrificing their elegance. The planning board was especially impressed with the integration of shared green spaces. Clare noted, stepping back from the table. That was your contribution, Graham said. Built on your foundation, she replied. We make a good team. He looked up. Their eyes met, and for a moment something quiet and unspoken stirred between them, an acknowledgement of a connection that had grown far deeper than it was ever meant to. He was the first to look away. It's late. Let's finish this tomorrow. Clare blinked. Did I just hear Graham Hollingsworth suggest leaving before midnight? Who are you, and what have you done with the real one? A genuine laugh escaped him, low and real. It changed his whole face. Even architects have to sleep sometimes, he said. As they gathered their belongings, Clare noticed him lingering by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out over the glittering skyline. A penny for your thoughts. He hesitated. I was just thinking, I haven't enjoyed collaborating with anyone this much since. She waited. Since Meredith. He finished almost in a whisper. She was an interior architect. We worked together before we were anything else. The name hung in the air between them. Graham didn't talk about Meredith. Not at the office. Not to anyone. But tonight, he had. The next morning shattered the rhythm they'd built. At 10 o'clock sharp, the doors burst open, and in strode Cole Kingston, founder and CEO of Kingston Developments, Breyer and Hollingsworth's most influential client. Well, Cole boomed, walking past reception like he owned the place. Hollingsworth. Just the man I wanted to see. As always, he bypassed every rule of office protocol and somehow made it feel like the rules had always been optional for him. Graham straightened his cuffs and squared his shoulders. The storm had arrived. Graham stood as Cole Kingston strode into the office, every inch the tycoon he believed himself to be. Graham's expression was impassive, his posture crisp. Cole. I didn't realize we had anything scheduled today. Spontaneous visit, Kingston said with a smirk, then his gaze flicked to Clare. And, who's this Clare Monroe? She's managing the Harbor Light project, Graham replied, voice deliberately neutral. Cole Kingston, the man said, offering his hand. He gripped hers just a second too long. A real pleasure. Clare returned the handshake without flinching. Likewise, can I get you something to drink, Mr. Kingston? She offered. Cole. Please, and actually I have a better idea. Join us for lunch. I'm treating Graham, and I'd love to hear more about this project. The city council can't stop raving about. Before either could decline, he was already leading the way. Lunch was held at a private dining club perched above the harbor, the kind of place where power was passed between wine glasses and whispered promises. Kingston dominated the table, talking loudly, and often his interest in Clare, quickly veering into something far from professional. So, Clare, he said, topping off her wine without asking, even as she tried to shield the glass. How does a woman with your talent end up buried in Hollingsworth and Keene? I'm always scouting new perspectives for Kingston developments. I'm quite happy where I am. Clare answered firmly. He leaned in slightly. Smile all show and no sincerity. Everyone's got a number. Mine includes dinner this weekend. Across the table, Graham's jaw tightened. Cole, he said pointedly. We should go over the Lakeview expansion while we're here. Kingston waved him off. Business can wait. I'm more interested in your brilliant project manager. Clare kept her tone composed. I appreciate the interest, but I keep my personal and professional lives separate. His smile vanished for a beat. You may want to rethink that. I can be very helpful to someone's career. The rest of the meal was laced with veiled threats and unwelcome flattery. When they returned to the office, Graham was unusually quiet. Back at her desk, Clare was organizing notes when he finally spoke. I'm sorry about Kingston. He's a powerful client, but that doesn't excuse what happened. You don't owe me an apology. She said he does. 3 days later, catastrophe struck. A lead engineer flagged a critical weakness in the foundation schematics for Harbor Light. If unaddressed, it could stall construction by months. This is a major setback, Owen said grimly during an emergency meeting. We don't have time for setbacks. Graham snapped. We need answers now. For the next week, Clare and Graham barely left the office. They transformed one of the meeting rooms into a strategy bunker, diagrams layered over every wall, calculations scribbled across whiteboards. They barely slept, barely spoke outside of technical shorthand. On the 6th night, somewhere between fatigue and frustration, something clicked. There, Clare breathed, pointing at the revised framework. If we redistribute the weight load across these junction points, we can strengthen the core without tearing everything down. Graham finished circling key segments in red. Their hands brushed as they reached for the same part of the model. The touch lingered quiet, but electric. Neither moved. The moment held until Graham's phone buzzed, cutting sharply through the silence. He answered, Yes, she's here. Clare watched his face shift from focus to something harder, colder. No, that's not an option. Yes, I'm aware what that would cost. He hung up with a tight exhale. What was that? Clare asked, though she already had a sinking feeling. Graham looked straight at her. He wants dinner with you tomorrow night, or he walks, every contract, every project. The air between them went still. That's blackmail. Clare said, fury rising in her chest. That's how Cole Kingston does business, Graham muttered, running a hand through his hair. One of the only times she'd seen him visibly frustrated. He controls nearly a fifth of our annual contracts, he added. Clare's jaw clenched. So what now? Graham looked at her, then his gaze piercing and unwavering. That depends entirely on what you want to do. I'm not going to ask you to have dinner with him. No deal, no project is worth that. She blinked, surprised by the steel in his voice. Even if it cost you 20% of the firm's revenue, she asked quietly. Even then, he said without hesitation. He began collecting the sketches they'd scattered across the table during their long nights solving the foundation crisis. I'll call him tomorrow. Let him know we don't conduct business like that at Hollingsworth and Keene. Clare watched him for a moment longer. You'd risk your company for a principal. Graham paused, then looked up. For the right principal, he said. His voice was calm, but there was something else in it, something unspoken, and for the right person, the words lingered between them, soft but potent, like a match, not yet struck. The following morning, Clare stood quietly in Graham's office as he called Kingston. His tone was crisp, professional, measured but unbending. "I understand this means you'll be taking your developments elsewhere." Graham said, his voice cool. "We'll make sure your files are in order by the end of the week." He ended the call and leaned back, slowly exhaling, like he'd just dropped a weight he'd carried too long. "It's done." "Thank you," Clare said softly. "It was the only right thing to do." Graham replied, though a flicker of concern clouded his face. Not everyone took the decision as stoically. 20%, Graham. Owen exclaimed when he heard the news. "We'll have to cut teams, we won't," Graham said sharply. "We'll find new clients. Better ones." Owen's eyes narrowed. "This isn't just about Kingston, is it?" His glance shifted toward Clare, but no one answered. Later that week, as Clare worked late finalizing the Harbor Light revisions, her phone buzzed with a number she hadn't seen since before the divorce. James. Her pulse faltered, not from longing but from a tangle of emotions she thought she'd already packed away. "What do you want, James?" she asked when she picked up. "To talk," he replied. "I've been going to therapy. I know I messed things up badly, but I need to apologize properly." She shut her eyes, grateful. He couldn't see the flood of feelings on her face. "It's late for that," she said. But he pressed on. "I'm in Seattle for a conference, one dinner. That's all I'm asking." Against her better judgment, she agreed. The next day, while she and Graham were reviewing contractor proposals, she mentioned the dinner offhandedly. "My ex is in town," she said, flipping through a folder. "He wants to meet. For closure." Apparently Graham didn't respond at first. Then coolly, "Just for a few days." Clare nodded. He asked about reconciliation, but that's not going to happen. He didn't look up from the page in his hands. Right. The rest of the afternoon, Graham was quiet. He canceled their evening work session with a vague excuse. Clare sensed the wall going back up brick by brick. Dinner with James was exactly what she expected. His apology was smooth, his demeanor remorseful, but so had been his lies. When he reached for her hand, she didn't hesitate to pull back. "I'm not interested in trying again." "James, is there someone else?" he asked. She paused and thought not of the man across the table, but of city models at midnight, of sketches shared in silence, of a touch that lingered too long, and words never said. She thought about it all, about late nights, spent reworking architectural blueprints, about the warmth in his voice when he let his guard down, about how Ethan Ward had shut down a powerful client to protect her dignity without blinking. "It's complicated," Clare said, finally pushing James's question aside. The next morning she arrived at the office to find Ethan's desk empty. His assistant offered a rare explanation: he'd taken the day off. At noon, a familiar voice interrupted Clare's quiet focus. "Take a walk with me," said Rachel Ward, standing beside her desk with her usual blend of elegance and candor. They strolled to the quiet park 2 blocks from Hollingsworth and Keene. The air smelled faintly of pine and rain. "My brother's a fool," Rachel said without ceremony. Clare blinked. "Pardon, he found out you had dinner with your ex, and now he's convinced you're rekindling things. So he's decided he was reckless to let himself care again." Clare sighed. "There's nothing happening between me and James. That part of my life is over, I know that. You know that. But Ethan, he's stuck in the past. He's convinced himself that falling for someone again would only end in grief." They sat on a bench beneath a maple tree, its leaves flaming orange and red. Rachel glanced at her, her tone gentler now. 20 years ago, Ethan was different, open, passionate. He'd laugh until his stomach hurt. But after Meredith, after she died, he buried himself in blueprints and deadlines. He never let anyone close again. She was an interior designer. Claire murmured. They were a powerhouse. Rachel smiled faintly, made spaces that felt like poetry, but when she died, he locked the door on anything that felt human. Claire looked down. I'm just someone who works for him. You know it's more than that, Rachel said softly. And so does he. That's what scares him, but someone has to take the first step, and it won't be him. That night, Claire found herself driving to Ethan's apartment, her heart loud in her chest, but no clear plan in her mind. The concierge recognized her and waved her up without hesitation. When Ethan opened the door, he looked surprised but not displeased. He was wearing jeans and a faded gray sweater that softened his normally sharp, polished appearance. Claire, he said, I wasn't expecting anyone. Can I come in? The apartment felt different now, warmer, slightly chaotic. Books were stacked on the coffee table, and unfinished espresso sat cooling by the window. I'm not getting back with James, Claire said before she even sat down. Ethan blinked. That's your decision? Is it? She challenged. You've barely spoken to me since I told you we were meeting. I've been busy. You've been hiding, she said gently, because it's easier than admitting you care. He turned to the glass, the city stretching beneath them in a sea of lights. Caring complicates things. Life is complicated, she said, stepping closer, but that doesn't mean we stop living. He was quiet. When was the last time you took a risk that wasn't about work? I'm not what you need, Claire, he said finally. You don't get to decide what I need, she replied. That's my choice. He turned to her. And what do you need? Claire's breath caught. Honesty, she whispered. His face shifted. All right, Ethan said. I haven't stopped thinking about you for weeks. When you told me about dinner with your ex, I convinced myself you'd go back to him, because it felt safer than hoping this. He gestured between them. Was real this, Claire echoed. This thing, he said, his voice raw. Whatever it is, whatever it's becoming, I'm not good at this. I haven't been close to anyone since Meredith. Claire smiled softly. Then we start there. Maybe we could take things slow, Claire said gently. Start with dinner. No sketches, no CAD files, just dinner. Ethan. Ward's expression softened, a rare vulnerability peeking through. I'd like that, he said, though I can't promise architecture won't come up. Claire smiled. I'd be disappointed if it didn't Friday. Friday, she confirmed, turning to go. Just before she reached the door, he added, Thank you for not giving up on me. She glanced over her shoulder. Smile, quiet, but full of meaning. Some foundations are worth unearthing, she said, even if they've been buried for a long, long time. The next 6 months passed in a rush of milestones, both professional and personal. The harborfront development, once just an ambitious blueprint, was now a gleaming, near-complete structure praised by critics as a rare blend of vision and functionality. What those glossy write-ups didn't know was how perfectly that description also suited its creators. Ethan and Claire had taken care with the shift from colleagues to something more. Their first official date had been tucked away in a small Italian bistro near the marina, a candlelit corner where work was never mentioned. Once I had no idea you played chess in college, Claire had said, genuinely surprised, as she stirred her espresso. There's a lot we haven't discovered about each other. Ethan had replied, eyes brighter than she'd ever seen them at work. At the firm, their boundaries stayed intact, punctual, professional, poised. Still, Thomas occasionally offered knowing side comments. You smiled during the budget meeting, he'd whispered to Ethan one day. Should we call the press? Now, standing together at Harborfront's ribbon-cutting ceremony, Claire felt a weightless sense of pride as she watched Ethan shake hands with city leaders, developers, and urban planners. A reporter approached, notepad poised. Ms. Whitmore. She began as project lead. How does it feel to see Harborfront completed? Claire smiled, eyes scanning the soaring atrium above them. It feels like watching an idea take on breath, she said. This space is proof that when architecture honors both people and purpose, it becomes something truly timeless. The reporter scribbled furiously and working with Ethan Ward. He has quite the reputation for, let's say, high standards. Claire looked across the crowd. Ethan stood a few feet away talking with a city planner, his presence calm but magnetic. The standards are high, she replied, because what we build has to last, not just structurally, but in the way it makes people feel. That kind of work deserves nothing less. Later, as the ceremony wound down and the crowd thinned, they walked side by side through the atrium, the same one that had ignited their very first creative breakthrough. "We built this," Ethan said quietly, reaching for her hand. "We did," Claire whispered back, giving his fingers a soft squeeze before letting go as a group of junior architects approached. That evening, they joined the team for dinner at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city skyline. Laughter rang out as glasses clinked. Toward the end of the night, Thomas stood glass raised to harborfront. He said, and to the unexpected partnership that made it our best work. Yet. Across the table, Claire caught Ethan's gaze. They didn't speak, but they didn't need to. After dinner, despite the crisp autumn breeze, Ethan suggested a walk along the waterfront. Claire tucked her coat tighter as they strolled. "There's something I need to talk to you about," he said, his tone shifting into something serious. "Should I be worried?" "Not worried," he replied. "Just something big." He stopped and turned to face her, the wind tousling his hair. "We've been invited to take the Castillo Eco-District project in Barcelona." Claire blinked. "That's huge global stage sustainable design, everything we've been working toward." "Yes," Ethan nodded. "But they want someone on the ground for at least a year." Understanding settled in her chest like a weight and a question she wasn't sure how to answer. "And you want me to take it?" Claire asked softly, her eyes searching his face. Ethan nodded slowly. "At first, yes, professionally, you're the obvious choice. But that was before." He paused, gesturing between them. "Before us, Claire's breath caught, before you realized what it would mean to be apart." "Exactly," he admitted. "For 20 years, this firm has been everything to me, but these past 6 months you've shown me there's more to build than just buildings." She tried to smile, though the thought of separation gnawed at her. We could try long distance. But Ethan shook his head. "Actually, I have a different idea." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Claire froze. "This isn't what you think," he added quickly, flipping it open not to a ring but to a key. "Well, not yet anyway. It's the key to our new office in Barcelona. I'm proposing we take the Castillo project on together." Claire blinked. "Together. You'd relocate? You'd leave Seattle?" "Not forever," Ethan said. "But for a year, yes. We'll open a satellite office. Thomas can oversee things here. I've stood still for a long time. Claire, I'm ready to move forward if it's with you." She looked at him. Really looked the softened edges around his eyes, the way his face had come alive in recent months. The guarded man she'd first met was gone, replaced by someone willing to take risks, not just with steel and stone, but with his heart. "This firm is your legacy," she said carefully. "Are you sure?" Ethan smiled. "It's not my whole life anymore. You are part of that now." Then he reached into his other pocket, pulling out a second box, this one unmistakably a ring box. "This one is what you think," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "I've never been good at this, at opening up, at letting someone in. But you make me want to be." He opened the box to reveal a single diamond, delicate and timeless. "Clare Whitmore." He said, "Will you take on Barcelona with me? And maybe in time take a leap of another kind? Will you consider becoming my wife?" Claire gasped laughter, spilling through the tears in her eyes. "Only you would make a marriage proposal feel like a project pitch." "Too much?" he asked, suddenly unsure. "Not at all." She stepped closer. "Yes to Barcelona. Yes to this new chapter, and yes to one day being your wife." Though maybe we build the foundation first. Ethan's smile lit up his whole face as he slid the ring onto her finger. Practical as ever, he teased. Someone has to balance the dreamer, she whispered, kissing him softly. 2 weeks later, Thomas hosted their engagement party at his lakeside home. The entire Ward plus Whitmore team gathered to toast not only the firm's international leap, but also the unexpected love story at its center. I never thought I'd see the day, Thomas joked during his speech, champagne flute in hand. When I brought Clare into the firm, I hoped she'd help us navigate clients and sharpen our creative edge. I didn't expect her to be the one to finally melt Ethan Ward's architect-grade emotional insulation. Ethan raised an eyebrow in mock protest. I wasn't frozen, just extremely well insulated. Laughter rolled across the deck. To Ethan and Clare, Thomas continued, who've shown us that the strongest structures are built not just from concrete and glass, but from courage, patience, and second chances. As the toast concluded and glasses clinked around them, Ethan leaned in close to Clare. You know, he whispered, I was wrong. About what he looked at her eyes, soft and awed, about caring. I used to think it made life harder, but now I know it's the only thing that makes it worth it. Clare squeezed his hand, thinking back on every moment that led to this one, from spilled coffee to shared blueprints, from personal heartbreak to something deeper. A partnership rooted in trust, shaped by resilience, and now strong enough to carry them anywhere in the world. Even perhaps to forever. To all the complications, Clare said with a teasing smile, lifting her glass toward his. To foundations, Ethan replied, clinking his mug to hers, and the futures we build on them. 1 year and 3 months later. Clare stood on the narrow balcony of their sunlit apartment in the heart of Barcelona, the morning breeze tugging gently at her robe. From where she stood, the iconic towers of Sagrada Familia rose like a cathedral of dreams in the golden haze. Below, the scent of fresh bread from the panaderia mingled with the salt of the sea. Coffee Ethan's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar. He appeared with 2 steaming mugs, offering one as he leaned beside her against the iron railing. Perfect timing, she murmured, her wedding band catching the early sunlight as she accepted it. They had married 6 months earlier in an intimate ceremony on a cliffside overlooking the Mediterranean, just Thomas, Sophia, and a handful of close friends. It had been quiet, meaningful, and entirely theirs. The contractor called, Ethan said, taking a sip from his cup. The atrium glass for Castillo arrives tomorrow morning. The Castillo International headquarters had grown from a sleek concept into a landmark of innovation under their joint direction. The project, initially slated for 1 year, had stretched when the client added a second phase, but neither of them minded. Their Barcelona chapter had become a life of its own. We need to call Thomas about the Seattle expansion. Clare reminded him, board meetings tomorrow. Ethan nodded, his eyes drifting toward the desk inside. A laptop sat open beside a framed photo from their wedding. He somehow looking years younger than when she'd met him and Clare, glowing in a simple white dress that danced in the ocean breeze. I never imagined. This, he said, voice quieter now as his gaze lingered on the image. The Castillo project, she teased gently. Any of it, he admitted, chuckling. When you spilled coffee on those prints, I thought you were a complete disaster. I was, she laughed. Just not the kind you expected. Their shared workspace inside had become a collage of who they were. His intricate models shared shelves with her design sketches and colorful concept boards. A calendar on the wall marked their return to Seattle just 2 months away. But neither of them had quite decided if they were ready to leave. Ethan's phone chimed. He stepped back inside to answer the video call. Thomas and Sophia's familiar faces filled the screen. There's our Barcelona power duo, Thomas grinned. How's the most ambitious project on the continent? On schedule, Ethan said. Just in time for our flight back. Seattle's still standing, Thomas added. But I can't promise it hasn't missed you. Sophia leaned in. The Madison green light was approved yesterday. Sustainability, focus, community-centered. They're asking for Claire by name when she's back. That's amazing, Claire said, joining them. But as the conversation continued, a wave of dizziness washed over her. She excused herself quietly and disappeared down the hall. When she returned, Ethan had ended the call and was waiting, a crease of worry in his brow. "That's the third time this week," he said gently, setting down his cup. "Do we need to see someone?" Claire didn't answer with words. Instead, she took his hand, turned it palm up, and laid it over her belly. "I already did yesterday while you were at the site." Ethan blinked, then froze his mind, catching up. "You're—" he began. She nodded. "About 8 weeks. Looks like Seattle's not the only new beginning waiting for us." For a heartbeat, he stood still. Then a laugh broke from his lips, clear, full, and joy-filled. He wrapped his arms around her as if she might vanish, holding her close with reverence. "A baby," he whispered. "We're going to be 3. Ethan pressed a kiss to Claire's hair and whispered, "We're having a baby." Later that evening, they strolled along the quiet shoreline just beyond their Barcelona apartment. The moonlight danced across the water, gentle waves echoing the rhythm of their footsteps. "Looks like we'll need to rework the Seattle house plans," Ethan said, ever the architect, already adjusting in his mind. "The second bedroom gets that perfect eastern light in the mornings. It'll make a beautiful nursery." Claire laughed softly. "Always planning. Some things never change," he said with a smile, "and some things change everything." He paused, staring out at the distant horizon where the sea met the sky. "If someone had told me 2 years ago that I'd be standing here married, expecting a child, considering a permanent home in Spain, I'd have had them removed from the building." "Fired for delusional optimism," Claire teased. "Exactly." He chuckled. "I had my life drawn out like a perfect sketch. All work, no distractions, no mess. And no joy," Claire added gently. He turned toward her, the breeze tugging at his shirt sleeves, his expression open. "No, I was surviving, not living. Thank you for changing that. We changed each other." Claire replied, her voice steady with meaning. She thought of the woman she used to be, the one who walked away from a broken marriage and a career that had drained her spirit. The one who was sure she'd never let anyone in again. As twilight blanketed the city, they returned to their apartment, arms brushing, hearts aligned. They spoke of names and colors, of timelines and baby kicks to come. They talked about parental leave, flexible designs, and making room for cribs next to coffee tables. "You know," Ethan said, as they reached the lobby of their building, "for someone who built a life around blueprints and control, I've never felt more at peace, not knowing what comes next." Claire gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "That's how the rest of us live, one draft at a time." "So long as we're drawing it together," he said. Later, from the balcony of their apartment, they watched the city stretch out below them, Barcelona glowing like a dream, made real. The skyline shimmered, layered with stories and surprises, much like the one they had built between them since that first day at Bennett Design. 15 months ago, Claire mused, resting her chin on Ethan's shoulder. "It all started because I spilled coffee on your renderings." "No," Ethan said, wrapping his arm around her waist. "It started because you weren't afraid to build something new out of a mess." He laid his hand over hers, resting gently on her stomach. "You taught me that some of life's best designs begin with broken lines." Claire leaned into him, her heart full, her future bright. In the city where they'd once come as co-workers and stayed as partners, they now stood as something even greater, builders of a life that was only just beginning. From the quiet tension of a coffee-stained blueprint to whispered promises on a Barcelona balcony. Ethan and Claire's journey reminds us that the most meaningful structures in life aren't made of steel or glass, but of trust, forgiveness, and the courage to love again. Their story wasn't about perfection, it was about starting over. It showed us that healing can begin in the unlikeliest of places, an office, a rooftop, a rain-soaked evening, and that sometimes what feels like a mistake is simply the foundation of something extraordinary. So if you've ever felt like you were too broken to begin again, too lost to be found, or too afraid to hope, remember this. Even a cracked foundation can hold a beautiful home, and every great love story begins with someone daring to care. Thank you for watching and feeling this story with us. If it moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that speak not just to the mind, but to the heart. Until next time, keep believing in second chances.